Trade beyond COVID-19 continues to be a hot topic, with this year's World Trade Organization focusing on the effects of the pandemic has had on trade and how a multilateral trading system can help build resilience to COVID-19 and future crises.
The annual hybrid event was held from September 28 to October 1st and is the biggest public outreach event on the WTO calendar. This is what the agenda looked like.
Trade beyond COVID-19, building resilience. That's the theme of this year's WTO Public Forum here in Geneva. Go inside the forum with us as we bring the voice of small businesses to the discussions on lessons learned from COVID-19, sustainability standards, building back better, AFCFTA, women entrepreneurs, digital trade, and much more. Follow the coverage from 28 September to 1st October with the International Trade Center.
Welcome back. Now joining us via Zoom is Aaron Cosby, Senior Associate of the International Institute for Sustainable Development.
He talks to us about border carbon adjustment mechanism and what impact that has on supply chain.
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's really great to have you join us on today's episode.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So, Aaron, I know you're an expert in this specific field around carbon adjustment mechanisms and so forth. So I want to ask you, do you feel that there's an acceptance already by some of the developing and manufacturing nations that border carbon adjustment mechanisms are unavoidable? And do you think that these type of countries should be ready for the enforcement that's coming up in the near future?
You are seeing already a number of countries take actions as if it was inevitable. So you're seeing Russia, for example, which will be one of the most significantly impacted by the Europeans' proposed CBAM, starting to work on a number of things, including their own taxation scheme, including some of the big exporting sectors hiving off their higher GHG components to focus on a cleaner component of manufacturing so they can export to the EU. So you are seeing many countries and firms acting as if it is inevitable. And I think whether the EU CBAM comes into force or not, as predicted, we are inevitably seeing a movement toward greater consideration of embedded carbon as a considered element in international trade flows.
Thanks for that. And do you, Aaron, see new technology in supply chain traceability playing a part in BCA to CBAM mechanisms in the near or distant future?
I do. If we look at the European CBAM proposal, for example, they're asking for actual data from the firms that are exporting to the EU under the covered sectors, and data not only on direct emissions of the firms that have produced the covered goods, but data on emissions embedded in input goods to those goods. This is a fairly onerous set of demands, and most firms aren't set up to have that kind of reporting. Many countries aren't set up to require that kind of reporting of their firms. So you will certainly see some adaptation in terms of those reporting mechanisms. However, I don't see it's good old-fashioned use of existing protocols like the GHG reporting protocol or ISO 1064 or 1464. The use of technologies like blockchain and other technologies that are typically used to go back up the supply chain to ensure responsible production and that sort of thing, I don't think will be necessary here. But there will be a necessary shift, and it will not be an easy one for many countries or companies.
Aaron, that's some really interesting points there, because especially obviously the bigger organizations who have got the resources and ability to do that sort of reporting, where do you feel the SMEs can fall into that? Because I think that they're quite daunted by the proposition of having a CBAM sort of reporting mechanism.
This is the age-old problem with these types of requirements. If you've got a larger firm or a vertically integrated operation, you can cover off those costs as a smaller percentage of your total operations. You can have in-house ability to keep track of those kinds of emissions and cover off that reporting. SMEs, MSMEs, absolutely not. So they will be disproportionately impacted by these kinds of demands. There are facilities that try to make it easier for exporting firms to do that sort of thing. The EU is proposing a database in which you would only have to register once. The data would be valid for a couple of years, but it's inevitable that smaller firms, where SMEs, are going to face a disproportionate burden of this kind of regulatory pain.
Sure. And finally, just to wrap up, what's been your experience of the forum, and what did you take away, and what was sort of the advice you'd like to give to some of our viewers who are, range from large multinationals right through to SMEs and MSMEs right across the globe?
Well, I have a particular interest in sustainable trade. So for me, it was very interesting to see the momentum in this direction coming from, not wild-eyed environmentalists, but people who understand that this is where the world is going, and that's leaders of business, leaders of services, and leaders of government who are trying to facilitate the future success of their national businesses. So we're in a new era, and I think the subject matter and the treatment of those issues at the forum reflects that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Aaron. All the best, and congratulations on the work you're doing in that sustainability piece.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In this next segment, Rosa Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Group, chats to International Trade Centre's Public Information Officer, Wakas Rafiq, about African trade and investment matters. Here's more from Rosa.
Thank you very much, Ms. Whitaker, for joining us here and speaking with the International Trade Centre. Can you tell us, what do you think do small businesses in the African continent need right now as they recover from the pandemic?
I think one of the greatest things that micro and small and medium-sized businesses need in Africa, they need financing. They need access to financing. And that's what businesses all over the world is needed. But it is even more acute in Africa. We're looking at a situation before the pandemic. There was a $331 billion gap in financing for micro and small enterprises in Africa. That is widened. So how do we get financing to them? The African governments cannot afford the stimulus programs that we've seen accrue to businesses in the developed world. I think one of the things we can do, we need to establish their creditworthiness of informal businesses. One of the reasons why these informal businesses don't have access to capital, they don't exist in the credit rating agencies. They don't have data identities. We know that they repay better, like informal businesses, for example, in Africa. They have some of the best repayment records in the world. Yet we don't capture that. We know how they buy, how they sell. Mobile money, $400 billion in mobile money transactions in Africa, largely among small businesses. We need to capture that. We need to codify it. We need to give them a data identity. We need to establish their credit worthiness so they will qualify for capital. Those are the two most critical things I think we can do.
Coming up next is Jose Luis Cancela, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Uruguay to the United Nations, who chats to Wakas about what's being done to help small businesses integrate into the international trade.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cancela, for joining us today. So as the world reels from the aftermath of COVID-19, do you see some real efforts being made to help small businesses integrate into international trade?
Well, at the informal working group on MSMEs at the WTO, we have been tapping on some of these issues for a long time now, I have to say. And I will have to say also that many of the things have been reinforced by the recent COVID crisis. This is also clearly put on in the package of 6 recommendations and declarations the group approved in December 2020. First of all, we have put a great emphasis on transparency, because we have been monitoring fastly changing trade measures taken during this COVID time to assure that they do not create unnecessary burdens for trade. Second, we have been tapping on the issue of access to information, which is crucial for MSMEs to trade. Access to finance. We all know about the $1 trillion gap for financing for MSMEs, so that remains a hugely critical issue. We have been also recommending to consult MSMEs when you pass regulations that can affect their business environment. I think that the COVID crisis has shown that going digital and cross-border payments are critical for MSMEs at this stage. E-commerce has been a survival tool for many of them during this period. So I think we, government officials, have to keep that in mind and see how important it is to help MSMEs to go digital, to better integrate into the world trade system.
Pamela Cook-Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Centre, talks about resilience being enforced at the core level within small to medium-sized businesses in this next segment.
She believes businesses need to be able to move to a greener technology, allowing them to access markets. Here's what she's got to say.
Hi Pamela, thank you very much for taking out time for us today. What measures do you think can be taken to help small businesses back on their feet?
There's several measures that we are looking at as ITC. It's not just about building back resilience and recovery in very general terms. We have to build at the core level. So the first thing we were looking at is, for example, greening their businesses. We have to be able to help small and medium-sized enterprises move to more green technology and incorporating green growth in their business. Why? Because it makes them be able to access new markets by becoming organic, for example. We heard from one of the panelists, right, who does hair products and how she was able to get organic certification. And that enabled her to be able to export more. Actually, her exports grew during COVID by 30%. So it shows the difference. We also need to look at digital. The fact is that those companies that were able to switch very quickly to digital or who were already online were able to navigate the crisis in a much more, powerful way. They were able to adjust and they were able to also maintain their market space or even increase it in some. So we have to address the issue of connectivity and we have to enable them to be able to connect to international marketplace and e-commerce. The third issue is, of course, the issue of gender. How do we empower women? We've seen the impact of the pandemic on women, not just at the level of economics, but also at the social level. The rise in domestic abuse, the increase in women becoming homeless, the fact that 2 million women in the US are projected to leave the workplace because of the care factor, and that they're the ones who, their care arena has increased by 300%. So these are the kinds of areas that we think will be important to address. The youth, also another critical factor. Over 60% of African population are under 35. So how do we address that? How do we build for the new economy? So these are the areas that I think are critical and that we will work on together and hopefully be able to rebuild, not just in terms of recovery, but resilience.
Right. Thank you so much, Ms. Pamela Cook-Hamilton, Executive Director, International Trade Centre.
Up next is a young entrepreneur who talks about her impressions of the WTO Forum. Meki Emma, the founder of Black & Natural Cosmetics, chats to Wakas in this segment.
Thank you, Mechi, for taking out time to talk with us today. Tell us, how was the session for you today?
It's been an amazing experience to myself and to my team, who are very excited that I'm here representing them and the country Cameroon. So throughout the panelist session, I learned a lot. I created a lot of contacts. I got to see the need for sourcing for smaller businesses and what is lacking. So it was an amazing experience getting to talk with the DG herself of WTO. It was a wonderful experience. There are some things you cannot really add value to. So this is one of those things that has no financial value, or you cannot really say thank you enough, like the words are not enough.
In this final interview, Olusegun Awolowo, the Chief Executive Officer of Nigerian Export Promotion Council, shares some of his takeaways from the forum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Awolowo, for speaking with the International Trade Centre today. I want to find out from you, what are you taking back with you from the forum this year?
I think the key word is also resilience. And I was really happy to be on that panel and discussion and of having my sister, Mechi, from Cameroon. because that is who our work is all about around the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. And easily everything she stated, all the challenges are also the same for many of our exporters there. And so the work that the WTO can also do in helping through the STDF, through the ITC, in helping SMEs, MSMEs grow and trade is also going to be very important. I know the WTO is a body run by consensus and looking at the bigger things, fisheries and all that. But, you know, from moving from pandemic to prosperity, we need them to use STDF and ITC to help SMEs and MSMEs to grow and trade better.
Thanks for joining us for this special World Trade Organization episode. Import-Export TV is a proud media partner of International Trade Centre. Make sure to stay tuned for ITV for regular in-depth coverage by the International Trade Centre celebrating positive global trade across all countries.
We'll see you next time.